I'm Karen Sims-Gallagher. I'm Dean of the USC Rossier School of Education, and I am delighted to welcome you here today for the inaugural event of USC Center Edge, the Center for Engagement-Driven Global Education. We have a very full program of engaging presentations and discussions that will communicate the vision and range of what this center hopes to communicate. I want to thank all of our presenters and panelists for joining us this morning. In a moment, Center Director Alan Arkatoff will introduce each of them to you. But I want to first express my gratitude to them for demonstrating the unlimited ways universities can find engagement in and outside of the academy, and how these intersections can have a demonstrable impact on learning. Before we begin, a few introductions. I'm going to introduce members of my Board of Counselors, and I'm going to ask them to stand and stay standing, and then we will acknowledge them as a group. I do want to acknowledge that panel moderator later in the program, Ravita Bowers, the visionary educator and retired head of the School of the Center for Early Education in Los Angeles, is also the incoming chair of the USC Rossier Board of Counselors. If she'll stand. All together. Welcome also to our board vice chair, Mary James, and as well as past chair, Ira Krinsky, and there you are, and Carol Fox, and Frank Baxter. Now let's acknowledge the five of them are here. Thank you. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce USC Provost Michael Quick. Michael was appointed provost in April of 2015, and just last month he was newly installed as the Shelley and Ofer Nemirovsky Provost Chair. So congratulations, Michael, on that honor. He also serves as our Vice President of Academic Affairs and as Professor of Biological Sciences in the USC Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences. And as the university's second-ranking administrator, he oversees all 19 schools on our campus. But that description really does not do justice to the influential role he plays in pushing each school to be innovative and take risks in order to tackle the most intractable challenges we face in society. We speak often of the importance of teaching and mentorship in terms of the relationship between faculty and students, or even between senior faculty and junior faculty. But I want to acknowledge Michael as an invaluable mentor to me and my fellow deans. Please help me welcome one of my mentors, Provost Michael Quick.
Goodness, Karen, that was really sweet. With an introduction like that, I can't wait to hear what I have to say. But really, I want to return the favor. You have been an amazing leader of our Rossier School, really doing amazing work, both sort of within the traditional definition of what a school of education might do, but to me, much more importantly, the kind of amazing work you've been doing on the edges, really working interdisciplinary, really talking about what does a school of education need to do in the 21st century to be at the leading edge? And so, kudos to you. You're just doing a terrific job. Thank you so much. I love partnering with you on all of these things. And welcome to all of our special guests. Certainly a huge welcome to all of you who are here today, who really care about this issue, for understanding that the core of our future in the 21st century starts with education, that it is the path to prosperity, it is the path to social justice, it is the path to making sure that we have a future in the 21st century and beyond. And so much of that has to do with how we engage the whole mission of teaching and learning, and that's true for what the Rossier School does, and it's certainly true for what is going to be taking place here at Center Edge. I've been provost for 3 years. It feels like 30. But what I love about this institution is its commitment to people and ideas and programs that I call entrepreneurial, convergent, and inclusive. The idea that we need to have programs and people that get out over their skis, that try new things, that have a better chance of failing than being successful, because that's how we make progress. And we do that convergently at the edges of disciplines, by bringing disciplines together, by getting out of our silos and converging not only across our disciplines in the university setting, but also converge across communities, governmental organizations, getting the university off of its campus. And certainly we value people who are and programs that are inclusive, who want to hear from distinct voices that can contribute to making that program or this institution or this city or this country great. We have all that in the Rossier School of Education. We have all of that here in the new Center Edge, and we're so happy to be launching that. We know we can do great work if we bring together policy, psychology, neurosciences, I'm a neuroscientist, technology to bear on education. How do we work together to have impact so that engagement drives learning outcomes? We know if we can engage students early and often, if we can make them want, we're 90% of the way there. They will do the rest. That's why I'm so proud that we are launching the Center for Engagement-Driven Global Education, a truly silo-breaking effort to create innovation in educational engagement. And when I talk about somebody who is entrepreneurial, convergent, inclusive, and somebody who gets out over his skis every once in a while, that, as you know, perfectly defines Alan Architoff, our leader of Center Edge. He has been, so I was just talking with somebody who said he's the Energizer Bunny. That he is indeed. And it is so wonderful to have him here at USC in our Rossier School driving this new center. He is the Katzman-Ernst Chair in Education, Entrepreneurship, Technology, and Innovation in our Rossier School, and has spent more than 2 decades of education policy leadership at the local, state, and national levels. He's the founder and former chairman of OnlineLearning.net. He's the former CEO of the Teaching Channel. He was part of the founding team of 2U. The guy can't keep a job, clearly. But we are so happy to have him here and doing exactly what we want our great leaders at this institution to do, is drive innovation, drive conversations around the most important topics of the day. He's going to do that with Center Edge, and it is my pleasure to bring him up on the stage right now, I think. Alan.
Good morning, everyone. We're at an educational venue, so. Let me start. For the dean, it is unusual to have the opportunity to work with someone that you both admire and then also is your boss. And the same goes for the provost. This audience should know that Karen's made equity and innovation core to everything that she does. And it's evident in all of Rossier's 10 centers. I hope that you'll take the time after you leave today, explore what Rossier is doing. It's quite remarkable, and many of the centers are represented here today. She's refused to play by the old world rules of schools of ed, which are far too often irrelevant and, quite frankly, broken. I'm going to get in a little trouble with if there are other schools of ed deans here, like, my apologies. No other top school of ed would dare to do what she has done. Creating 5 outstanding charter schools where what we teach and preach is met with everyday accountability. And I think it's really important to understand, maybe other schools of ed will have one K-12 school that they'll partner with. She said, we have to do more, we have to be there, we have to be in the classroom. And I can't tell you how many faculty meetings and other discussions I've been in where faculty said, God, do we really need to do that? We're going to be held accountable because we talk about this. And now we're actually having to do it. So she's doing it. And when she decided that having 50 students on a master's degree program was not cutting it, it was not making a dent, obviously, in the teacher pipeline, she decided to boldly create a partnership that actually improved teacher quality and scaled the program almost 20-fold. That's how you make a difference. Thank you, Dean. And when people talk about transformational leadership in higher ed, I think about Provost Quick, who has created a compelling vision of the future at USC. He motivates and inspires, and maybe even scares people just a little bit. Interdisciplinary work is a wonderful concept, but Provost Quick has shown that you need to translate it into real, tangible results, whether it be from a pedagogical, research, or business model perspective. That's the hard work. Ideas are the easy part. Execution is everything. He is the original just do it and do it right provost. He engenders a esprit de corps and an urgency that is palpable throughout every corner of the university. Thank you, Provost. As I think about those that make this USC community the extraordinary place that it is, I'd like to take a moment to pay tribute to my good friend, Bonnie Reese, a kindred spirit who passed away a few weeks ago. I think we have a photo of Bonnie. There she is. Bonnie was a life force on so many fronts, especially as it related to access and equal opportunity, whether it be as our Secretary of Education or as a UC Regent. I love this next photo of Bonnie. Can we cue it up? It was at the West Coast premiere of He Named Me Malala, and we have some folks here from LA's Promise Fund. That was a very special event. She so loved this moment. It was at LA Live. There was 7,500 or so girls from underserved communities being engaged by an important story and being inspired to break ceilings and walls wherever they might be. Look at those eyes at that woman in the middle. As the Boston Philharmonic's Benjamin Zander so eloquently and accurately has described, shining eyes tell you everything you need to know if you're succeeding as an educator. Rather than ask for a moment of silence for Bonnie, I'm going to invoke the African saying that you're not really gone until people stop calling your name. To honor Bonnie, we're going to work with the Schwarzenegger Institute to keep the fire burning on civic engagement and education. The crucial nexus between public education and civic engagement that John Dewey wrote about over 100 years ago is now clearly more important than ever. We're not going to talk about he who shall remain nameless on this day. This generation of young people, yes, that's what, yeah, we all know what that was about. This generation of young people, led by students like our own Miriam Antonio. Is Miriam's here? I see Miriam. Some of you may have read Steve Lopez's column, which talked about her life. She's an undergraduate student here at USC. Students like Miriam need to not just set the agenda, they need to help drive it. Bonnie would have insisted upon that. While we're talking about people that we appreciate, allow me to thank some other folks, and I'll do my best Academy Awards quick thing and before the music cues up and they push me off the stage. Roberta Weintraub and Ira Kunsky. Ira. Both are renowned leaders and educators. Together they are LA's dynamic duo of education and our dear friends who have been incredibly supportive. The Stern family, which has made civic engagement via the arts and education and has made a profound difference in the lives of countless LA area youth. There he is, Adam. To Team Rossier, where so many faculty and administrators have given me both their support and friendship, and forgive me, I could take another 10 minutes and thank each one of them individually. That would not be wise in terms of time constraints because we're here to hear today's speakers. But I want to do a special shout out to the External Affairs Department led by Carla Wall and with Stephen and Ross, who have been extraordinary. To Liz Fogel, who is helping lead us as we think through the future of being on the edge. To Beatrice O'Neill. Where is Beatrice? She's out here someplace working away. There she is. For all of you who have muttered something negative about what it must be like to have to work with me, I give you this tireless and fabulous colleague who manages all things center edge and me. And for all of you who have muttered something even more negative about me on what it must be like to live with Alan Arkatov every day, I ask you to give it up for my incredible wife, Mary. It's just like, yeah, I know, it's not about me. It's for them. I know. It's like, I'm a pain. My sons, Jacob and Michael, Georgetown grads, second year here at USC. My sister, Janice, brother-in-law, Barry, and my parents, Jim and Salome, 97 and 94 years young. My dad's sitting here taking photos. We have a photographer, Dad. It's okay. He will never cease to want to engage. But how's that for engagement? I love you. Thank you for being here. So we're here today to hear from some incredibly important voices as it relates to education and engagement. What will be some of the hallmarks of Center Edge? To cut through the education haze and get back to basics. Getting excited about learning and the power of what that does. As Frank Gehry once told me in a meeting with Turnaround Arts, Alan, just give the kids an opportunity to have a real sense of self. Damn it. He's right. I believe that to figure out a unified field theory for education, we're going to need to really rethink some basic fundamentals. One of them is engagement, and how we communicate is another. Whether it's peer-to-peer learning or giving students their own diagnostic toolboxes to better understand the neuroscience of how they think, learn, and act, we need to turbocharge our ability to communicate what really works and then get the hell out of the way. From an organizational standpoint, ours will be a lean, collective impact strategy. The focus will be on fueling interdisciplinary partnerships to bring about relevant, sustainable innovation to scale in the crucial area of educational engagement, with arts, sports, games, cell phones, and civics as our priorities. Delivering rapid cycle research and product implementation that effectively and efficiently communicates the best experts and the best solutions. We're in the epicenter of the imagination economy here in LA at USC. The subject areas are full of so many great folks, and we combine them with the best communications experts here at Annenberg and throughout the university, especially as it relates to storytelling. If there's a thread pulling through here today, always think about storytelling. In a world that's changing in mind-numbing ways at a record pace, the education ecosystem needs to evolve and move from the back of the pack to the front. I view engagement as the interstitium of education. With all that's known about human anatomy, you wouldn't expect the medical world to discover a new body part in this day and age. But researchers say they've done just that. They've labeled the network of fluid-filled spaces in our connective tissues as the largest single organ in our body, something that's always been there, that is so fundamental to life, and that's the way I feel about engagement. Something that's always been there, that is so fundamental to teaching and learning, but hasn't been appropriately recognized, researched, understood, taught, or utilized. There's so much to cover and think about, but we can start the discussion today. And what better way to do it than with the brilliant thinkers from disparate areas of expertise talking about, from their vantage points, educational engagement. Starting with the man some people call Mr. Creativity, Sir Ken Robinson. Due to the circumstances surrounding the birth of his first grandchild, Sir Ken needed to be in England today. But we're very happy to report that his daughter Kate and granddaughter Adeline are doing well, and that Sir Ken has added a very, very important title for today's introduction, Grandpa. I love that he's coming straight to us from a place founded by another Sir Sir Paul McCartney's Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts. If I recall, the provost loves London and Liverpool, which was open to forge a new approach to engagement and to performing arts training. Rather than repeat the bio that's already in your printed program, let me just give this simple intro. He's one of the most influential thinkers and educators in the world, and has shown himself to have the unique ability to synthesize and communicate both the perils and the promise of how we are educated and what it means to every single one of us. In thinking about Center Edge, there was only one person that I really wanted to have to give the keynote. The person who has the ability to toggle between academia, government, and all the other gatekeepers for education, and still be able to articulate the things in ways that are both realistic and inspiring. Someone guided by one crucial question: how do we best engage learners and allow them to flourish? Ladies and gentlemen, live from Liverpool, it's the Beatles. Whoops. Live from Liverpool, Sir Ken Robinson.
Well, thank you, Alan. And I know you can hear me because I can hear myself. It's a great irony, isn't it, that I live in Los Angeles. And when you told me about this remarkable center that you're establishing, I was absolutely delighted to be asked to come along and say some words of introduction, confident that I would simply be on the 405 for about, 2 days or more to get from Westwood, and be among you. And as circumstances fell out, as Alan said, I happen to be in England now, in Liverpool, which is where I'm from originally. So I wanted firstly to apologize personally for not being there in the flesh, as it were. I really hoped I would be and assured Alan that I would be. And I want to thank Alan, not only for the vision he brings to the centre, but for his graciousness and understanding about my not, in the end, being able to join you, as it were, in the room for this breakfast. But I was very keen to be part of this. I'm a great fan of USC. My son was a student at USC. And I think the work of the centre is important in almost every way. It's about engagement. It's also about collaboration among disciplines at USC. But it's also, as Dean Gallagher has said in describing the centre, about forging connections between home, school, and the community. And that, I think, is one of the great challenges that faces every education system currently. As it's fallen out, I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking to you from LIPA. You may see a photograph come up in just a minute of LIPA. This is the Institute for Performing Arts, which was established in 1995. And we're sitting here in the school that Paul McCartney attended as a student in high school. And the school was actually founded by Paul McCartney and Mark Featherstone Whitty, who is the chief executive. They both are. And they have done, Mark particularly has done absolutely remarkable work in taking what was a derelict building and turning it into what is one of the most effective, best respected, and I think all round one of the most important conservatoires for the performing arts in Europe. I'd push a bit further than that myself, but I'll settle for Europe for now. But look, let me just say a couple of words about why I think the school is so important. One of them is that it is in Paul McCartney's old high school. I went to school in Liverpool across the city centre, about 2 miles away. I went to a school called the Collegiate. And both schools ceased functioning as high schools, I think, in the 70s. Paul and Mark came to the school when it was empty and derelict and had the vision to turn it into this remarkable centre for education and training. My old school burnt down. I'm just saying, you can draw your own conclusions. But I remember talking here, I interviewed Paul McCartney for a book I wrote called The Element, and I asked him if he had enjoyed music at school. And he said he hadn't. And I said, did your music teacher think you had any talent in music? And he said, no, he didn't. Well, he does, doesn't he? And one of the other people on the same music program, 2 years younger than him, was George Harrison, the lead guitarist of the Beatles. And apparently his music teacher didn't think that George had any musical talent either. So I said, well, look, would this be a reasonable observation that there was this one music teacher in Liverpool in the late 1950s who had half the Beatles in his class, and he missed it. And he said, well, that's right. Well, it's a bit of an oversight, isn't it, frankly? And the reason I mention this is because I think the key to engagement in education is to take a more generous, compassionate, and expansive view of human talent and human interest in the world around us. That there are problems inherent in our current education systems which themselves are responsible for creating the disengagement that we're now concerned about. It's the system that creates the problem. It's not the students. And so we shouldn't be trying to fix students, we should be trying to fix the system. Human resources, I mean, it's a slightly odd phrase, I think, but it serves the purpose here. As I see it, are like the world's natural resources. In several respects, one is that they are very diverse. The second is that they're often hidden from view. You have to search for them and dig them up often. They're not just lying around on the surface, visible to anybody. And thirdly, even if you discover them, you have to refine them and develop them and turn them into something. That should be the business of education, but too often it isn't. And I want to say why that is. But I do think the work of the centre or that the conception of the centre is very well positioned to tackle these issues. And Alan and Dean Gallagher, I'm sure, will be the first to recognise that there are many others in the field now who are trying to address these issues of engagement and of equity, which is the second great founding principle of EDGE, and that there's a network here that they can both work with and I hope give leadership to and help to galvanise. Well, look, what's the problem? How would you judge the impact of an education system? If we want to improve it, what is it exactly that we're trying to improve? What are the outcomes that we think are proper to an education system? Well, there would be some easy ones to spot. One is you would hope that students in the system would enjoy being in it, wouldn't you? You'd hope that they'd be excited about learning. You hope that they would turn up for the day enthusiastic and wanting to learn and leave at the end of the day looking forward to the next one. So it's worth asking whether that happens often enough. The second is you would expect there to be a very, very high rate of success from the system, a high rate of graduation. Well, again, that would be a harsh test for many schools in the US. And I say this, as I say, as a resident of the United States. I ought to point out, incidentally, that I have lived in Los Angeles now for 17 years. We came over to LA in 2001. And I have a green card. I wish to point this out. I'm not just jumping on the internet here to take a few shots at the system. I have a green card. I'm invested in California, in Los Angeles. I'm officially an alien, incidentally. I'm a resident alien. So thank you for that. And yet I move among you, undetected. Actually, I've recently applied for citizenship. I might have picked a better time to do that. We'll find out. But there are problems, as you know, across the American education system of low graduation rates. I mean, it depends where you look, but on average, about 20% of people who start the 9th grade in American high schools don't complete the 10th grade. So graduation rates might be another marker. Overall well-being, you'd expect students to be happy and to feel fulfilled across a wide range of spectra, physically and emotionally and socially. How well does our system do that? You would expect, wouldn't you, that the result of an effective education system would be a positive contribution to a buoyant economy and the sort of economies that young people are moving to become part of. You would expect, wouldn't you, that education would contribute to cultural understanding and cultural vitality in our communities. And you'd expect also that education would contribute to positive engagement in our social institutions, in our voting patterns, in the coherence and cogency of our political systems. Well, I think we would question whether our current systems are doing that very effectively. You know, Alan earlier mentioned John Dewey, and John Dewey once said that every generation has to rediscover democracy. I think that's true, and you only have to look at the most recent elections, not just in America, but on this side of the Atlantic, to recognize that many young people are simply not interested in these democratic processes in the way that we thought they might be. So there are some markers for why would we consider an education system to be successful. I don't think on most of those we could claim that many public systems of education around the world, not just in America, by the way, but in Europe as well, we could claim to be as successful as we would like them to be. In fact, on the contrary, here's the problem. There's a distinction always to make between symptoms and causes. I want to talk about the causes in just a minute, but just in terms of symptoms, there is a very high rate of non-graduation in our high schools in America. Let me focus on those. I dislike the term dropout, and I would rather not use it. Because if you call somebody a dropout, it rather sounds, doesn't it, as if they have failed the system. I think if you've got over 20% of young people, sometimes 30, sometimes 40 in some of our inner city districts, not completing high school, I think it's a bit brash to say that they have failed the system. I think at that point you've got to say the system failed them. If you were running a business and you lost 30% of your customers every year, you might wonder whether it was these stupid customers or your business plan. And I believe that the problem lies not in the students, as I say, but in the system itself. The system creates the problem. And we need to understand that if we're going to solve the problem. Beyond people who don't graduate, there is a massive undertow of people who just aren't interested. You'll be getting some figures during the course of the morning on the levels of engagement and disengagement, and they are really very daunting to recognize how many people turn up at school and just go along with it, but aren't especially interested in it and are playing the game to get through it. And then there's a third factor, which the best way I can think of it is dissonance. That's to say a division, a separation between what goes on in schools and what goes on in the world around schools. For example, there is a big movement at the moment to reform schools by raising standards. On the whole, it's failing to promote the very capabilities in the economy that most businesses now say they want, including creativity, collaboration, cooperation, and communication skills. In Davos recently, the leaders of the World Economic Forum published a report calling on education systems to promote these very capabilities, but most of our systems simply don't. Which is ironic to me, because most governments are imposing on schools systems of education which are meant to be beneficial to the economy, and most businesses take the opposite view. In fact, many businesses these days aren't terribly concerned about whether students coming through the system have got degrees, for example, and often complain they lack the very qualities they're looking for. So there's a dissonance there. There's clearly a dissonance between what's going on in schools and the broader culture. Alan mentioned the impact of digital technology, and this is causing all kinds of anxieties and stresses and strains for young people as well as for adults. But this revolution in digital technology hasn't ended, it's hardly started. The revolution in artificial intelligence, which is heading our way just now, if we're to believe those who are on top of the literature and within the fields of research, is going to absolutely dwarf everything that's happened in the past 15, 20 years. I've no doubt at all that my daughter Adeline, who is 2 weeks old, well, as of yesterday, along with other children who were born this year, will be looking back at pictures of you 30 years from now with patronizing smiles. And they'll be pointing to these iPods and iPads and iPhones that you're currently holding, and we feel are so sophisticated and the kind of last word of technological evolution, and wonder how you coped. They were saying really it was like a thing, that you carried it around in your hand and you had to press it. I mean, how was that? And touch it with your fingers, like gross. So these revolutions haven't stopped. They've hardly started. You combine that with the rate of environmental change and population growth, and we have a very serious, even I would venture to say, a series of existential issues on our hands that education has to engage in. But these are all symptoms. The non-graduation rates, levels of disengagement, of dissonance, of stress and anxiety, they're not the causes. They're the outfall. The causes, I think, really lie deep in the ideology of our current education systems, which were evolved, it's worth remembering, in the mid-19th century to meet the needs of a different world. I can summarize it quickly. I think the problems are to do with rituals, resources and relevance. But the best way I can put it is that for most education systems in the past 15, 20 years, this has been a time of constant government intervention. Governments all around the world have been trying to improve education, largely for economic reasons, and they've adopted a set of similar strategies. A good friend of mine, Pasi Sahlberg, refers to this as the Global Education Reform Movement, or GERM for short, and it certainly seems to have been contagious. There are several elements of this particular strategy for school improvement. They've all proved to be catastrophic, but it's worth mentioning them. The first is the systems of reform are based on the imposition of ideas of conformity. I don't mean conformity in the sense of people behaving well and looking after each other and living orderly lives. I mean that they're based on a stereotype of human intelligence. And I think the provost would agree with this, that there is very much more to human intelligence than to the expansive capabilities of the human mind than those specific abilities that are required to do academic work or to get academic degrees. And yet we have education systems predicated on a very narrow conception of intelligence. And the consequence of this narrow view of ability is we generate a very large conception of inability or disability. If we expand our conception of ability in the first place, a lot of the problems the system causes tend to dissipate. The real signature of human life is not conformity. I mean, in terms of our capabilities, it's diversity. It's the exact opposite. And I think if we're to be serious about engagement, we have to understand and promote and implement conceptions of diversity, not just in culture, but of capability, of outlook, of disposition, and of temperament. The second is that our systems are based on the idea of compliance. You know, when No Child Left Behind became law, the government, with all its good intentions, it was a cross-party piece of legislation, concluded the best way to raise standards in schools was to standardize everything and to introduce a regular and what proved to be a ubiquitous process of testing. What they didn't do was provide a system. They opened that to the market, and this has proved to be a multi-billion-dollar business. It's been an absolute bonanza for the publishing companies and the testing companies, and it's been a great success for them, but a catastrophe for education on the whole. And I say this because of these disastrous figures we see for engagement, for non-graduation, and for dissonance. These systems around the world are failing in the very terms in which they were conceived. For example, in America, the great hope was that more and more testing would lead to an improvement in international league tables in mathematics, science, and languages. It's actually had no such effect. It's been a multi-billion-dollar failed experiment. And I agree with the provost. Innovation depends on failure, but you have to recognize when a failure has become a disaster. And the third is that our systems are based on linearity. This is a fiction in human life, as you know. I can't see you now, but you can see each other. Can I ask you to put your hands up if you are doing now with your life exactly what you thought you'd be doing when you were 15? Not so many, is it? Now, I mean, you may be working in a field you had in mind. You may have thought, well, I want to be a neuroscientist. I do want to be an educator. I do want to be a business leader. But most people don't have that conception when they're young. And even if they do, the lives you go on to lead are entirely and inherently unpredictable. And the reason is you create your life as you live it. Human life is a constant process of improvisation. It's a kind of conversation between whether or not you discover your inner talents and the opportunities around you and whether you take them or you move away from them. But the consequence is that every human life is different, unique, and unrepeatable. My daughter Adeline is like me. It's like her mum and her father. It's like other members of our family, like my wife. But she's not a clone of any of us, any more than you're a clone of your parents. Every human life charts a distinct course. And the course you chart has everything to do with whether or not you discover what's within you as well as what's around you. It's an organic process, not a linear one. And yet our education systems are predicated on linear conceptions of supply and demand. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is that the consequence of it is that we create disengagement. And we're not going to solve the problems of engagement if we double down on the current system and work from the assumption it's the children that we have to fix. What we have to do is create the conditions under which they would want to learn. And this is what I just want to come to. One of the themes that Alan properly talks about is the need to get back to basics. The basics are not a set of subjects, and he, I know, takes this view as well. The basics are the purposes of education and also what it is to be a human being and how human beings grow and evolve. I want to show a very quick video here. I mean, it is quick. It's about 30 seconds. Let me explain what it is. It's not a puzzle, but it's better to know what's coming so you can appreciate it. Basically, it's a short video off YouTube, and it's a toddler. His parents give him a present, and it's a banana. That's it. Just check his reaction to this banana. Matt, can you play the video?
Look at my box! it. You're gonna bring it home? What do you say?
Thank you. I got my banana.
I love that. You know, I really think we should take another look at bananas, don't you? I think we're taking them for granted. I mean, that joyous enthusiasm for discovering the world, it's a wonderful thing to see, and all babies have that. I mean, it tones down, obviously. It as well, it does tone down. I mean, you wouldn't want that going on in Ralph's every day of the week, you know, or you know, when you go to Whole Foods, you don't want people going around crazed, waving bananas around as if they've never seen one. I mean, restaurants would be an entirely different experience, wouldn't it, if we didn't tone this down a little bit. But the point is that children, and this is where we have to start, this is where the basics begin. Young children are learning organisms. They love to learn. They are driven by a kind of furious curiosity about the world around them. Think what they do in the first couple of years of life. Most kids learn to speak. I mean, that's a fantastic achievement when you think about it. And the interesting thing about it is that nobody teaches them how to do it. Children learn to speak because they want to and they can. They absorb it through their skin in the way they absorb all kinds of behaviors, understanding about people's reactions to them, how the world operates. Nobody teaches them it. And the reason you don't teach them, you know, if you're a parent, you didn't teach your child to speak, and you know why. It's because you don't know how you do it either. And even if you did, you can't instruct somebody in speech. You know, there isn't a point, is there, where you sit your child down at the age of 18 months and say, look, we need to talk. Or more specifically, you do. And this is how this is going to work. You probably noticed your father and I making all these noises the past 18 months, and I know it's all rather baffling, but some of these noises mean things. We call them nouns. They're the names of things, and there'll be about 5,000 of them you'll need to pick up. Some of these noises we make are not the names of things. They're the names of things we do with things. We call them verbs, and there'll be about another 4,000 of those. And by the way, if you alter the tone of your voice at the end of the word, you can indicate whether you have done something or whether you're about to do something. And don't worry about the subjunctive. Honestly, nobody gets it. So, you know, you don't do that. Children learn through their skin. But here's the thing. There is a difference between learning, education, and school. Kids love to learn. They don't all get on with education, and some have a hard time with school. Here's the difference. Learning is a natural process of acquiring new skills and understanding, and we do that naturally, voraciously, and continuously throughout most of our lives. Education is a more intentional process of learning, and the reason we have education systems is because there are things we believe as a culture that it's important that children learn that aren't left to chance. That's why we have a curriculum. There are some things that we believe are important to learn which are too difficult, in our view, for people to learn on their own. For calculus, for example, it's very unlikely, even with the best discovery methods, that most kids would stumble across calculus on their own, given that only 2 human beings in the history of humanity ever did. So there are some things that we feel it's important to teach people to save a bit of time, or because they're too complex. But the thing is that, which is why we have pedagogy and teaching. And some things in education are hard to come by, and some things are difficult to learn, and so some people do have difficulty with that. But they also have difficulty with the way we do education, with the compliance, the conformity, and the linearity, which actually inhibits the natural process of teaching and learning, which impel children if they're left to their own devices. A school, properly conceived, is a community of learners. I think that's the best way to think of it. It's a community of learners. And I'm all for schools. I have no arguments for the dissolution of schools. But we do have to reimagine what a school is. The reason schools matter is because most of what we learn from each other. Even people who live alone absorb the culture around them. You don't learn to speak the Spanish spontaneously if you happen to live in some remote part of Norway. You learn from the culture. And all of us are heir to the vast complexities and great treasures of human culture and history. So a school is a place where people come together to learn. The problem is we've come to do schools in a particular way, and we've come to conceive of education systems in particular ways as well. So the task is to reimagine school. So on what basis would we do it? Let me just conclude with this. There are, I think, three big purposes that we have to consider, or three main principles to consider when we come to look at issues of engagement. The first is we have to personalize education. Now, it seems odd to have to say that, but the fact is every human being is different. They have unique capacities, they have unique dispositions and unique temperaments. I wrote about this a while ago in a book called The Element. Education is not an impersonal process. It's about the growth and development of living human beings and individuals. Over the course of their lives, babies from birth, and in fact some good way beyond that, go through the most remarkable metamorphosis. They develop cognitively, in their understanding, they develop emotionally, they develop socially, they develop physically, they develop spiritually. How they develop and whether they develop has everything to do with their nature, how they are born, who they are born as, their inherent capabilities and dispositions. It has an equal amount to do with the opportunities and circumstances in which they're grown and develop. That's why I'm saying a lot of human capabilities are hidden beneath the surface. We have to discover them and we have to refine them. That's the proper job of not just education, but education in concert with the home and the community, which is why Dean Gallagher's point about that triad is so important. So it has to be personalized. That has implications for the curriculum and it has implications for teaching and learning. It has to be customized, secondly, to circumstances that children are actually living in. There's no good reason why an education system, a school in one part of LA Unified School District, should be exactly the same sort of place, even aspirationally, as a school in the southern tip of Florida. People are living different lives in different circumstances with different challenges. Yes, there are things we need to learn in common, but we also need to customize it to the circumstances and particular challenges of our culture. How do we do that? We do it by investing in the one thing that governments have failed to invest in America. There are three big bits to education. There's the curriculum, there's pedagogy and assessment. Governments have placed a mistaken bet on the idea that we can improve education by standardizing the curriculum and by investing in assessment. The only thing that has ever made a difference in improving engagement, in therefore raising standards, in deepening the pleasure, enjoyment and achievement of young people in education, the only thing that ever works is teaching. Every school system in the world that is successful has invested in its teachers. It's true here in LIPA. This institution couldn't work without the quality of the teachers who work here, working in concert with the students, not being didactic towards them, but engaging with them. Engagement is a relationship, and the crucial relationship is between the discipline, the teacher, and the student. You know, teaching is not properly conceived a one-way traffic. I did an event a few years ago with the Dalai Lama. I just think you should know this. And this is who you're dealing with. And I remember the Dalai Lama was asked the question, and he paused for a long time, and he said, "I don't know. What do you think?" It was a beautiful way to put it, because it illustrates that teaching is a conversation, not a monologue. Our students have much to teach us, and we have much to learn from them, as well as vice versa. Every school system that works, every institution that's great and is achieving great things, invests in the quality and the respect and the professional development of its teachers. Yes, we need a curriculum. Yes, we need supportive, informative, descriptive, and illuminative systems of assessment. But unless we focus on what really matters at the heart of engagement, all these things will simply report more eloquently on the failures that we're perpetrating. And the third big principle is purpose. Why are we doing all of this? Well, as we face a rapidly changing world, I think the core to this is we have to help young people discover the world inside them and the world around them for economic, social, cultural, and personal purposes. I've tried to set some of these things out in a book I've just published for parents. It predates me becoming a grandparent. I was going to write it anyway, but I'm going to go and read it now. I've written it. It's called You, Your Child and School. Parents are partners in this process, as Dean Gallagher has indicated. We can't step outside the community and the homes which our children are part of. Education has a duty of care to be more actively engaged in them. The final thing, and it is the final thing I want to say, is this, that we also have to rethink the narrative of education. We have lived for too long with the idea that the whole purpose of primary school is to fit people for secondary school, and the whole purpose of secondary school is to prepare people to go to college. No, colleges are well and good. USC is a great college, but people don't have to go to university to have a life. On the contrary, this is a busted flush. I've worked in universities. I'm not against universities. I like academic work. I have a PhD. I write books. But not everybody needs this process. Not everybody benefits from it. The consequence, by the way, is that we're pumping people through into higher education who don't want to be there and who have no idea what they're going to do when they leave, and they're leaving with a mountain of debt. Along the way, we're actually disparaging all sorts of other routes into fulfilling lives and vibrant communities and healthy economies in the vocational sector, in the technical sector. We're deferring all of these opportunities for this kind of unfulfilled promise of a university degree. I think that has to be on our agenda for this discussion. While graduates are going unemployed and underemployed all around the world, hundreds of thousands of jobs in America in technical and vocational trades are neglected because people are being discouraged from applying for them because it's seen as second rate. This narrative of academic and vocational is part of the deficit of having a narrow view of intelligence to begin with. So thank you for this invitation. Thank you to Alan for asking me to be part of it. My repeated apologies for not being with you in the room. My thanks to Lipper again for making it possible for me to be with you at all. I honestly was thrilled to do this because there is no other conversation that matters more in education than how we engage the students who we're meant to be serving. And it isn't about improving what we do now, it's about reimagining what we do now and putting it onto a different track. So I think today's conversations are deeply important, particularly for a massive complex system like LAUSD, for this wonderful city of Los Angeles with its great network of communities and cultures and economic opportunities. And it's the historic role of a great university like this to be at the center of the intellectual regeneration of that community. So thank you for the invitation. My best wishes for the conversations that lie ahead, and I look forward to being more involved in them when I eventually get back to Los Angeles. Thank you.
So depending on the connection, I thought we have time. We want to go on forward. We have an exciting discussion with panelists, but maybe a few questions for Sir Ken. And let's start. Ben Austin, I'm thinking that we just, Sir Ken is talking about, I see Ben, Sir Ken's just written a book for parents. Ben is was literally the creator and led the parent revolution here in California. And now he's leading a Kids First agenda. So Ben, you want to ask Sir Ken a question?
Sure. I love, as the dad of a LAUSD student with ADHD, I love the vision that you laid out, Sir Ken. Why is it, do you think, that the status quo in Los Angeles and so many places around the world like Los Angeles are so far afield from the vision you laid out? And as we in Los Angeles are at an inflection point with new school board leadership and a brand new superintendent, how can we think differently about the underlying incentive structures of the politics of public education and the incentive structures of the bureaucracy itself to drive the LAUSD towards the kind of vision that you just laid out?
Well, thank you, Ben. It's, people often ask this, how do you change the education system? And I think that it's important, isn't it, to recognize what sort of system it is. It's not a mechanical system, it's not a chemical system, it's a human system, and it's made up of millions of people, literally, thousands of institutions and hundreds of thousands of interest groups. And like all human systems, whether it's an economic system or a social system more broadly conceived, or a political system, it exists in the actions of the people who live in it and are part of it. So, teachers say, for example, and I've never spoken in criticism of schools or teachers or of anybody in the system especially. I think often policymakers get it wrong for all sorts of reasons, but there are wonderful schools in LA Unified School District. There are wonderful schools across California, great people doing great things, inspiring and dedicated head teachers and teachers and parents who want to engage with them. But too often the great work they do happens in spite of the prevailing political imperatives, not because of them. And there are all kinds of reasons why that happens. One of them is that politicians come through with rapid fire agendas. I think the political cycles are getting shorter in California, in America, more generally speaking. Politicians of all stripes tend to think that between elections they may have 18 months to get something done, and so they, I think, naturally turn to what they consider to be what's achievable within 18 months, something they can quote some facts and figures for. I think that's part of it. We need education as a long-term business, and we need a long-term strategy. It's why universities matter. It's why educators matter, because we're the people in it for the long term. So we have to work with politicians to get them to move away from this short-termism. The second is that institutions themselves develop their own logic. They are impelled by their own interests, and they become gridlocked by bureaucracy. We know that to be true. You end up in every system. By no means is it only true of Los Angeles, it's everywhere. You have systems which have money which can't be released for the things they should be released because they're not in the right budget heading. So the administration starts to drive the vision rather than the other way around. And it's nobody's really in control of that unless somebody very strong comes in with a view to changing it. And I think as well that people are often too busy to do what I hope the centre will do, which is be able to stand back and see the larger picture. This is a need where there's a desperate need for leadership. And that is the proper role, incidentally, of the school board. But the school board's had all kinds of difficulty of its own, and of course there are all sorts of interest groups. So I'm the last person to try and minimize the complexities, but I don't think we should use the complexities as an excuse for doing the wrong thing and say, well, what can you do? The fact is there's a lot we can do. I'll give you one quick example. In the time I've lived in Los Angeles, so it's been 17 years now, every state in the union in America, well, in recent years, has passed legislation to approve same-sex marriage. Now, you'll all have a different view of it, doubtless, in the room. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I'm thrilled and delighted about it. But that didn't happen because members of Congress went on a retreat in Aspen and decided it was about time they went and sold this idea to the electorate. It happened because the culture shifted, and things are shifting. Things do shift in the culture, and it's a change in the zeitgeist. I was born in 1950. I lived through the 1960s. I lived through the sexual revolution, as you can see. And I actually missed it. I didn't go out that weekend. But even then, at the height of the so-called sexual revolution, nobody was discussing same-sex marriage. It wasn't on the agenda. And now people say, well, what's the problem? Can we get on and do it? There are all kinds of examples where the change might be, and it wasn't because nobody worked hard. A lot of people worked very hard on that agenda, but there is a shift. Look what's happening in the Me Too movement just now. Look what's happening post-Parkland with students leading a public outcry against the excessive problems of gun control. These shifts do happen, and there are shifts happening. You will have noticed, I'm not just talking to you, Ben, now, but people in the room and the leadership of the district, that parents around the country are exasperated and angry at the awful pressures that are being visited on their children by this constant, incessant culture of testing, of standardization, most of which, by the way, is in the interest of trying to get people into college. Now, I'm all for people who want to go to college, going to college. I'm all for a healthy third sector in education, of course. But this has become something other than that. And parents are pushing back. Kids are harming themselves. They are committing suicide in appalling numbers, not just in America. I mean, in the real hotbeds of testing in parts of Asia, for example, these figures are terrifyingly high of self-harm, of depression, of drug use. I mean, this is part of a large complex. But there are things happening in the culture. Kids are pushing back. Employers are pushing back. Parents are pushing back. And the development of centres like this at UC Edge, which isn't there to celebrate the current system, but to look at the way it can be evolved, are part of a shift that is happening. So systems change. That's my point. They do change in time. And I always come back to Gandhi's point, be the change you want to see. If you're a teacher and you have a room full of children in front of you, what you do next is the education system. It's not what the school board does next, it's what you do next. If you're a school principal, there's a lot more room for change in the system than people often believe there to be. A lot of what goes on in school is habit. It's not legislation. It's just we do that because we always did that. A lot of the problems in linking with communities are just habit. It's ideological stuff. So leadership is very important. It's important at the school level, the community level. It's important at the university level. It's important at the school district level. But don't wait for anybody else. That's always my advice. Don't wait for somebody else to come along to fix this for you. Get on and start doing the thing you think matters and connect with other people who are moving in the same direction. You'll find there are an awful lot of them.
Since this is a student-focused conversation, Miriam, you want to ask Sir Ken a question?
Hi, my name is Miriam Antonio, and I'm a student, an undergraduate here at USC. My question is whether you think we've done enough progress in our schools to change the culture around innovation and creativity. If yes, can you give an example? And if no, why not?
Okay. Well, no, we haven't done enough. No, we're never doing it. I published a book a few years ago. I'll keep telling you about the books I published, because. But I did. I gave a talk at TED, which is why a lot of people, I think, came to know about the work I do. It's been widely seen. But I followed it up with a book a few years ago called Creative Schools, Revolutionizing Education from the Ground Up. And in short, since time is short, that I give a lot of examples there about innovation that's happening in the system already. There are wonderful examples. I mean, for example, not far from you now, there's a wonderful project called Artworks LA, which has been around for a long time doing work with kids who are falling through the system. There are wonderful schools in the system, but there are a lot of people working in so-called alternative education in different parts of the city. And not only in the arts, but in all kinds of other disciplines as well, because I don't personally conflate education with the arts. The arts are a set of disciplines, but you can be just as creative in the sciences, in technology, in mathematics. Creativity is a function of human intelligence. It's not a function of a particular discipline or subject area. The interesting thing is a lot of these projects that you'll see around there have been very successful in re-engaging kids who've fallen out of education. And they work because of the principles I've suggested. They're about personalization, customization, links with the community, and breaking down barriers between particular disciplines. It interests me they're called alternative education. I mean, if all schools were like this, there wouldn't be the need for the alternative. But I'll tell you just quickly before I'm done, where some of the innovations happen is exactly where it's been pitched in the center. It's about rethinking what disciplines are. I mean, for example, I mean, I don't want to speak on his behalf at all, but I make an assumption that the provost would agree with me on this, that as a neuroscientist, that although different areas of the brain have it seems typical and sometimes differentiated functions, the brain is not divided into compartments in the way a school curriculum is. The brain works holistically. I mean, there are critical centers for different capacities, but it works holistically. You can't take a bit out of it and expect it to function properly. And also, the brain only works in concert with the body. Intelligence isn't just what's happening up here between our ears. I've often asked people in the past, I mean, there isn't time to go into all this now, but ask people how many senses they've got. Most people will tell you they've got 5 senses. Confidently, they say 5 senses. And then if you press them, they'll say, well, there's a 6th one. You say, well, what's that? They say, well, it's like intuition. So, the 5 senses people mention, like sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell, and so on, they all have organs that do it. And so they're real senses in that sense. Intuition's a bit different. It's a kind of spooky sense, isn't it? That girls have more of, evidently. A competent physician, I'm sure in neuroscience you would agree with this as well, will tell you have at least 9 senses. Some would go further than that. I mean, if you start engaging with sense like your sense of appetite, the internal somatic senses, you get well beyond 9, but certainly 9, including balance, orientation in space, pain, and so on. But we don't think of those because we've taken it for granted that we've got 5. We've been told that since we were kids. We get told there are, STEAM disciplines are different from the arts and they're more important. They're simply not. Disciplines are cultural conventions, and they only really exist on school curricula. Once you get outside of school, neuroscience, for example, is by any conception a multidisciplinary field. Technology is a multidisciplinary field. It's simply not true that people who do STEAM subjects go on to run companies in Silicon Valley. Most of the companies in Silicon Valley are run by people who've worked in the humanities and so on. Outside of schools, the world is interdisciplinary. In fact, disciplines keep shifting. In the 18th century, you couldn't have studied English literature in a British university. Nobody thought it was important. You didn't study novels because nobody wrote them. Sociology wasn't anything that concerned anybody in the 1920s. People didn't teach chemistry in the 19th century. It wasn't thought to be a real discipline. Our sense of disciplines continue to evolve, and the reason it happens is our knowledge evolves and our connection with the world around us evolves, and in just the same way the way that the human brain is plastic, and constantly in a state of flux and growth and development, so our cultural conceptions are as well. So interdisciplinary, to me, isn't just saying, well, can we get the conventional disciplines to have occasional meetings and perhaps have an away day somewhere and see if we can't have a project. The idea of interdisciplinarity is to rethink the fundamental epistemology of the education system. That's a pretty good thing to be doing. And it's where real innovation comes from, when people rethink some of the basic principles they've taken for granted and try and figure out some other way of conceiving of them. And so the schools I'm talking about are doing that sort of thing. They're stripping away the conventional conception of disciplines and of teachers and of assessment and reconfiguring them. There's plenty of that stuff going on. There's some in the book, but I think as you look around, you'll find more to encourage you in LA.
Let's all give a big round of applause for Sir Ken. I'm reminded, Sir Ken, if you can still hear me, that there was a movie, To Serve with Love, so from LA to London and back to LA. I won't do the Lulu #1 song from whenever that was, but that was a story, by the way, about a teacher in the tough East End of London who came from Guyana by way of California. So thank you, Grandpa. Thank you, Sir Ken. Thank you so much for engaging us and being part of this day. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to ask Julie Evans to come up. Julie is an extraordinary light in education, and someone who I try and push her as hard as humanly possible to turn up the volume, because the work that she's doing is so important. I don't think there's any research survey of its kind in the country that is as important as what Julie has been able to do with Project Tomorrow and the Speak Up survey. You can read about her in the program. I would encourage you to go to the Project Tomorrow Speak Up website. Very simply, this is the most comprehensive longitudinal study of its kind in the country, which everyone does this compartmentalizing. Someone looks at students, someone looks at teachers, someone looks at administrators, someone looks at the community. Julie did the simple concept of saying, let's research everybody, and then let's understand what's really working in real time. Not 5 years later, not we'll get back to you, but the Speak Up survey, I think, is the most important survey of its kind. We're very proud that she's partnered with Rossier and Center Edge. We are her exclusive research partner, and we need to do better by Julie. We need to do better by using the data that's available to us as educators, as researchers, as practitioners. And so I bring you Julie Evans. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you, and thank you so very much, Alan, for inviting me. Thank you, Dean Gallagher, as well. So I am very happy to have this opportunity to be here to share with you some of the findings and some of the research that we've been doing. I'm waiting for a second here for my presentation to come up. I think they're going to bring it up. Right, there we go. Project Tomorrow, as Alan said, is an internationally known nonprofit organization in the education space. We're particularly focused in on what students are doing in terms of learning both in school and out of school. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the drivers for innovation in education. I'm not doing this right. There we go. So as you all know, there are many different drivers in education, many different things that are impacting what schools are doing or trying to do. We have a particular interest right now, as Alan mentioned, in the digital tool space. So how are digital tools and content and resources transforming the education process? We do that through our Speak Up research project, which is an annual survey that collects and reports on the authentic feedback of K-12 students. Yes, we do poll kindergartners, their teachers, their parents, the administrators, and the community members. Because as Alan mentioned, we think that that holistic approach to the ecosystem is the best way to not only understand the drivers for innovation, but to think more about building the capacity of our schools and districts to use data such as this in a very high-impact way. Now, one of the key findings that we've had over the last 15 years of doing this work has been looking at the interrelationship or the interconnectivity between these three concepts: the concept of engagement, which we've been talking about today, the idea of digital tools supporting that engagement, and then the third gear, shall we say, about this idea of how do we make sure that today's students are well prepared for the future and whatever that might mean for them. Now, in many ways, these seem pretty commonplace. Of course, those are important gears in education, and of course, they're interrelated with each other. But in fact, there are many different challenges that schools face. They definitely face opportunities with approaching their mission in this way, but they also face some really interesting challenges. And so sort of the state of all of this, the state of the mix of all of this, is probably best represented by this particular quote. Got a little bit of a delay here. There we go. This particular quote from Suzanne Collins, who you may know as the author of The Hunger Games and Mockingjay. So this is the reality in our schools today, in many of our schools. Our leaders are looking at different things. They are seeing different things happening in their schools and in their classrooms, and they think they know what they're seeing. In fact, they may not. Or they have a perception of what it should be, but they can't see the evidence of it. And it's a little bit of this confusion in terms of, are we seeing the right things? Do we know what needs to happen in our schools and districts today? It's a little bit, folks, like this particular image. So some of us in the room may look at this image and we may see a face. It has a deep set eyes, a high forehead, a strong nose. Some of us may see a woman that looks like she's in a swishy skirt, kind of walking through leaves. Some of us here in this room probably see both of those images. Some of us in this room may not see either of those images. We all look at things through different lenses. In the conversation about learning and engagement and the use of digital tools, we're bringing to the conversation our own perceptions, our own experiences, the exposure that we have had to these tools. And that is an overlay on what our expectations are going forward. I will tell you, folks, after 15 years and over 5.4 million surveys that have been submitted to us through Speak Up, our students have a very different set of lenses that they are using to think about learning, to think about engagement. And we have, as Sir Ken said, a lot to learn by listening and observing those students as we go forward. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple little opportunities for some learning here today. I'm not going to call it a pop quiz because I know that scares people, and we just heard from Sir Ken about assessment, so I don't want to go there. But let's, oops, this is definitely jumping ahead on me here. Let's see first what our audience feels. So if you have a preference for reading, is your preference to use a printed book or to read something on a device? Who would say their preference is to read a printed book or article? Okay. How about to read something on a device? Okay, so we have a nice split here. Well, you probably already saw, and you might be surprised, what we've learned from students is a little bit different as well. So for our youngest students, 2/3 of them say their preference is to read on a digital device. Only a quarter of high school students feel the same way. Well, why is that? It has to do with their experience. It has to do with the exposure that they have had. Our very youngest students, our kindergarten, first and second graders, and even our pre-K students are spending a lot of time with interactive devices, including doing reading with their parents. These devices are highly engaging, highly interactive. They have opportunities for them to contribute to the conversation in ways that printed books that their older siblings used at the same age may not have had the same role for them. So we see these different lenses even within the students. We actually have multi-generations of students today. So we can't paint with one brush and say all the students have the same perception of what they need. Let's play another little one. So what do you think about this? The use of technology within learning helps students develop creativity skills. Who thinks that's true? Okay, who thinks that's false? So a few folks do. Let's see what the students tell us. Let's see what the students tell us. Here we go. The students actually have a very keen appreciation of the outcomes of using technology, not only for engagement, that they're more motivated to learn, but in fact, they see it around a different set of outcomes. They actually talk in terms of how it increases their achievement level. They talk in terms of the personalization that Sir Ken mentioned. They also talk about skill development. So 50% of middle school students told us that the use of technology in their learning lives helps them develop creativity skills. It also helps them develop critical thinking skills, communication skills, collaboration skills, the opportunity to get along with diverse groups of people and understand different cultural differences. There are a whole host of different outcomes that students talk about regarding technology. Quite often in our schools and districts today, unfortunately, it's more singly focused on just a few of these. So we'll do one more, folks. And I'm going to take a page from Sir Ken's book here and think about reimagining education. So what if we could, and maybe many of you here in the audience have this opportunity, have the opportunity to reimagine or to design the ultimate school for today's students? What types of technology could possibly drive student achievement to some new levels than they ever have been before? Well, we see a host of different types of tools here. From the student perspective, it is a pretty easy answer, folks. The students tell us all of the above. In fact, for today's students, learning is based upon a very clear-cut vision that the students have through their lens, based on their experiences, their exposure, that they want learning that is socially based. They want learning that is untethered from the restrictions or limitations on the resources in their community, in their school, or even their teacher's knowledge. And they also want learning that is digitally rich because it provides context and purpose to the learning process. So for the students, they think about all of these tools and many more as being part and parcel of the learning experience. Not something that happens on the side, not something that happens occasionally, but something that is an inherent part of their learning modality today. So as Sir Ken said, we have to continue to learn from our students, and there is much research to be done on this. As he said, and I loved it, I wrote it down, we're just at the beginning of this. This is not Jell-O yet. We don't have it all together. And so the research that we're doing is very important. We are thrilled to have our partnership with the Rossier School to help us with a lot of that research. So we're going to continue to come forward with new findings and new ideas, and in particular, new ways for schools and districts to build up local capacity, to change what they're doing, to meet the vision of the students. I want to congratulate the center on the launch today. I want to thank Dean Gallagher for her leadership and Alan Arkatoff for his leadership. We are thrilled to be part of the family and so happy to be here today. Thank you very much.
So as we ask our moderator and panelists to come up, and I'll do a quick little intro, maybe they can start coming up. I want to just, when you go out here today, this is all about engagement. And a lot of you, we didn't turn up the volume enough. In the foyer area there, you might have seen there were 16 elementary school kids. They're from 122nd Street Elementary. They're playing a game called NBA Math Hoops. And when you leave here today, they'll be playing the final round. This is a board game. This is a game that allows kids to learn math. And Khalil, who is one of the founders of NBA Math Hoops and Learn Fresh, is here with us. I encourage you to go watch these kids play and learn in a way that's relevant to them, not necessarily to us adults, but that's really relevant and that we can quantify with efficacy and research is working. The final round will be played out there today at the conclusion of this event. And I also want to thank, I don't know where our musicians went, but that was the wonderful Inner City Youth Quartet and Charles Dickerson. And that's an unusual partnership. Again, we can't do this by ourselves. And with Margaret being here, it was so important to show that we can do the community partnerships. Margaret, you know, the ability to partner, in this case, with the LA Chamber Orchestra, with USC, giving kids that opportunity, those musicians, Those elementary school kids, it takes a village. So without further ado, I've got to do my quick hellos to these folks. Everyone's bios are in your program. Ravita, thank you. Ravita, as Dean Gallagher mentioned, is our incoming board chair for Rossier. Most importantly, when someone's been your headmaster and is your principal, you are very dutiful. So I always, my sons are here, and I always twitch. I sweat when she's around that I've done something wrong. But I can say this as a categorical statement. Ravita was the finest schoolmaster, not just in this region, but in the country, and whose voice continues to lead the discussion on the important questions facing education. I want to thank everyone here, but certain folks made long-distance treks. So David Baker, who's a passionate visionary for sports, and how do we leverage it to transform education? Margaret, as I said, an extraordinary musician. And what I love, I was a failed musician, and my parents would acknowledge that, I'm sure. I was a violinist, and I quit after my juries here. I aced my juries, but that was about it. I had sort of Peter Principled or Alan Principled myself. But the beauty of her artistry and her approach to music, it brings her to the audience and the audience to her. And that is an unusual engagement. That is so extraordinary. And then Flint, for those of you, you've seen his films, you've engaged him in some way that you don't even know, but he's as dazzling a transmedia expert as there is in all the land, and whose creative abilities are only matched by his unbridled enthusiasm. And then walking into the room, I see our school board president, and she's had a quiet week. She doesn't, just little things going on, picking the superintendent and those kind of things. There is nobody. When we talk about social-emotional learning, Madam President.
Hello, sir. I have a tardy slip.
I know somebody that can take care of this for you. That would be you, sorry. When we talk about social-emotional learning, there's no one that does a better job at engaging via social-emotional leadership than Monica Garcia. So, Ravita, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, we all hear a lot of panels. And so we decided to try something a little different today. So we're going to invite you into a fishbowl. And the rules for a fishbowl is we get to have a conversation amongst ourselves, and you get to eavesdrop. And we thought that might be fun, particularly as a way for us to engage with one another, and for you to engage in a more passive kind of way, but to be engaged in the ideas that are tossed around by this very diverse group of individuals. So I'm going to start. I was reading an article the other day about the life of Maya Angelou, and I ran across a quote that I thought was particularly important for today. She said, "People won't remember what you said, people won't remember what you did, but people will remember what you made them feel." Mm-hmm. And so let's start from a place of feelings. All of you come from different areas, have different expertise, different experience. Let's talk about engagement and the work of the center through the lens of your life experience and what you're doing every day. Who wants to start? David, you want to start?
Sure, be glad to. I tell you, Maya Angelou was all about love. Yeah. And she wanted people to feel love, and she experienced love, specifically through her mother late in life, and then through her grandmother. But in my discipline, in football, it is all about engaging in others. You can't be on the team without engaging in someone else. You can't be a part of a really great team unless you trust them, unless you love them. I think in creativity, what Flint does, or in music, what you do, you are all about harmony, about everybody playing a role. I mean, we got fat guys in football. You got tubas, okay? We got little people. You got piccolos. Everybody has their role, and you have to learn that in that huddle, it's all about inclusion. It's all about the science of being a team, and not just how I get the most out of myself, but how I help the person next to me get the most out of them, because we're all in it together. It may be, and one of the things that I think is unfortunate, you know, Monica, because I think sometimes people think that the classroom is where learning occurs, and the field or the court of play is where exercise is had. And in reality, it's not about, you know, just the brain or the body, it's about the heart. And I think Maya Angelou was of that belief that the heart drives the brain and the body in every way possible. So I think it's a place where we can learn how to be a team. And if we can learn how to be a team, we can learn how to be a family. If we can learn how to be a family, we can learn how to have great companies, like in the stuff that Flint does. And if we can have great companies, we can have great communities. And those communities can make us a great country.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I love that quote. I have two aspects to my artistic life. One is as a performer and one as a teacher and educator. And I find that quote so applicable to both of my lives. You know, I think I go on the stage, I don't know how many hundreds of times a year, and it's really true. We work so hard in our team effort to create a wonderful performance. But at the end of the day, it is never about the technical aspect of what we do. It's about how we make people feel. That's our job as musicians. As an educator, that's been one of the great joys of my life, because I think we all work, you know, the technical aspect of playing an instrument is so demanding and so sometimes overwhelming to young students. And I find myself constantly saying, as recently as yesterday to one of my USC kids who's about to perform tonight, forget it all. I give you the freedom to forget all the details that we've been working on for the last semester and just go out and make yourself get goosebumps on your skin, because if you do that, you've accomplished your job. And I think engagement of I wanted to say also about young people. I think as a performer, one of my great joys in life is this program that my orchestra, the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, does called Meet the Music. And we bring a lot of inner city kids to this beautiful hall at the other music school, Colburn Music School, the Colburn Conservatory. And they come in groups of, 300 kids for two different performances. And I think of all the places I've played in Carnegie Hall, at La Scala, and Queen Elizabeth Hall, all over the world, one of the great experiences of my life as a performer was a little boy stood up. A lot of these kids most of these kids have never been to a concert in their lives. This little boy stood up and he said, we did a Q&A, and he said, I don't have a question. I just have something to say. Today was the greatest day of my life. And you know, that's engagement.
Absolutely.
That's making a difference in someone's life. So I think the more we can do that, and that my passion is music, so I do it through music. But I think that kind of experiential gift that we give the kids is so important.
You know, we talk about the digital world, which you're so heavily involved in. And we sit in this room as different generations of digital experience. The digital immigrants, the digital natives. But now I like to talk about the digital devotees, the people that have grown up in a digital world and speak a different language and embrace those things very differently based on their experience. Flint, talk to us about the world in which you exist.
Oh, good. I don't have to talk about feelings. No, I'm just kidding.
Sure you do.
I was thinking about all this. I mean, you see, I don't see, right now I'm working at a company called Niantic, and we make geo-mobile augmented real-world games. We have Pokemon Go was our big hit, and then another game called Ingress. And then I'm working for DARPA, and we're doing a massive social network for engineers and scientists to expedite innovation. But at the end of the day, And it's what you were talking about goosebumps, and what our speaker was talking about the senses that we don't take into account, that aren't, you know, sight and sound and smell and taste. And what it really gets to is every time I've had a good product, whether I'm playing it or I'm making it, it's a phrase I've used ever since I began. I never realized the reality of it, and that is you get the tingle. There's just this moment you start tingling and you know this thing's good. You know, and that doesn't mean there aren't 15 more horrible things that are going to happen in the project and you're done. It just simply means this is good. And, you know, conversely, if you don't get the tingle, it's a squid. But, you know, the whole thing is that's what you want to give. You know, I mean, our stuff has to be fun or it dies. I mean, we don't have a choice of it not being fun and not giving the tingle. It's just the degree to which you give the tingle. And then the different layers of it as you go on. And I would argue, and then I'll stop talking, but you know, I would argue that with a game, it is impossible to make a game that's not educational in some way or another. You know, and and so tying the tingle together with something that is advancing you, you know, that's the ultimate nirvana state we're looking for.
Absolutely. In the wall of the Innovation Center at my old school, there was a sign that said, fail early, fail fast.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're developing a whole generation of children who are a little bit risk adverse. And the silos in which we currently exist are problematic because it keeps us from engaging with one another. It tells us that our differences are so profound that we have no right to engage with one another. And yet, that's what education is. It's engagement and breaking open the doors of those silos and creating environments in which we can truly, on a very elemental level, take risks, fail, thrive from those failures, understand the learning paradigm that the next risk we take, we will have learned from the risk that we just finished. And Monica, when I think about risks, your job has some of the biggest risks imaginable, and especially in an environment nationally where there isn't a lot of dialogue going on around education and the benefits of education. So talk to us about what you're facing and what you're seeing when you think about engaging hundreds of thousands of students.
It's crazy, I have to tell you. Good afternoon. I'm so pleased to be here just because I was excited about what you all are wanting to learn and the love that you want to share. So in our world, in LA Unified, we are challenged every day to meet the needs of our students. And when we say 100% graduation, that means everybody. I come from a place where Gabriel Garcia Marquez said the university is a cemetery of ideas. And so I understand that schools are not the only place of learning. We learn inside, outside, right? That's the strategy. But if we can help our children be seen, if we can, and today's youth are demanding, see me, hear me, include me. They want to be part of the world and not limited by what the rest of us understand as limits. So I just turned 50, which makes me the middle of the school board, 3 older, 3 younger. But I always say, I am sufficiently inspired and sufficiently challenged. There are resilient and brilliant solutions every day. And I know each of you, whatever team you're on, whoever your client is, whoever your customer is, you can learn so much from our children. And they are hitting it all at the ballpark. We are 46th in the nation in per pupil spending in California. But every day, children with backpacks filled with challenges that we don't always talk about come to school and want to be just like you. They want to be people who contribute, people who are awake, people who are invited to be part of the challenge. And so I think that this idea of engagement is something that we wrestle with because we want our children to have skills. We are preparing them for the world not yet. And it is so important that love and learning go together. I think when we start with the humanity piece, right? Those feelings, the passion, the energy, we have to remind ourselves not to be afraid of change. We have to remind ourselves to embrace the other. And for our children in LA Unified, we're 91% kids of color and 76% kids of free and reduced lunch. And as a Trojan myself, I have to tell you, I remember coming into this room and being, wow, this is a wild kind of room, right? And so it is the people who help you see yourself and who extend the possibility of what can be. And then if the learning goes back and forth, Alan gets to learn from me and I get to learn from Alan. And I get to learn from Dean Gallagher and she gets to learn from me. And when you're with the class of 2030, who are our kindergarteners, and they get up and they say, we want to change the world. And they're not afraid to try. And that's a beautiful thing. So I think the challenge is to help people not step away, but lean in. And to accept, let's put away the single stories. Those don't exist. The beauty of Los Angeles is that the world learns from us.
Absolutely. You know, I love the name Edge Center and what it stands for. Because for 44 years, I worked with teachers and said, we don't need to be on the leading edge. We need to be on the learning edge. So that everything we experience as adults and everything our students experience as students, we learn from and rechannel that energy, that commitment, that learning, that risk-taking back into moving the education paradigm along.
But can I say, I love hearing you talk about risk. Yeah, I loved hearing Dean Gallagher talking about almost promoting failure. Because we've got to take a chance, and frankly, we've got to learn to compete. In my business, it's all about competition. But so is globalization, so is the world economy in what we're doing. Our children are going to need to learn to be more noble and, compete more. And, we've got to, what you were talking about, have a generation that is prepared to risk, and measure that risk and mitigate that risk, but risk on something important. In my business, again, at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, it's very popular, but we calibrate greatness. There have been 300 million men and now women that have played the game of football. There's only 5 million that have played it in college, like my son did here at USC. There's only 29,000 who have ever been paid to play it, coach it, or officiate it in the National Football League. And in Canton, Ohio, there's only 310 bronze busts and 174 living Hall of Famers. So that's an extreme level of elite. Absolutely. But we all think that they fell out of bed great. We all thought that they were made that way, and they were not. No. In my business, our business, it is not a pristine, it's not guys in tuxedos playing instruments, and we know they had to work hard to get there. But in my business, it is snot coming out of your nose and blood coming out of your mouth or your ear. You have to fight to be great. But I think the same thing happens, in getting to be a world-class musician or in getting to be, somebody who makes incredible games or education or being a great father or being a great mother.
So we were speaking earlier about my son. Unfortunately, didn't choose the violin. He became a high-ranking sports person, and I think I've been fascinated to see how similar they are. And we were talking about trust and how we, I think part of the problem, and I see as a parent, is that my generation overthinks parenting. We constantly are interfering in our children's lives and trying to control their outcome. And I see it a lot with my students, my younger students, my high school and kids over at Colburn, is that their parents are constantly micromanaging their creativity. You can't micromanage creativity. You have to give them the courage to take risk. And then you have to teach them how to trust. Because trust, especially in team sports, in orchestras, in chamber music, if you don't trust in each other, you have nothing. I mean, there is nothing in music that will survive that.
Absolutely. Another thing in the article I was reading about Maya Angelou said, she said, no child is born with courage, but every child is born with potential. And we have the opportunity as educators, as leaders, as parents, to help nurture and develop that potential. And to find that space in which every child can be successful.
No, it's interesting. It's this is a brand new thought, so maybe a really bad one, so ignore it. But it just occurred to me. We're talking about this generation of participation trophies and helicopter parents and all that, and the lesson of sports, is and frankly any performing art is you have to, what sports teaches you, it teaches you how to lose, and how to lose, get up, do it again, try to do it better, and go back. And so much we try to avoid is rigor, and I'm realizing the importance of just rigor. But it occurred to me the exact same moment they're handing out participation trophies and sort of wimpifying the world, you have kids obsessed with their Xboxes and their PlayStations and their games. And your Xbox does not care that you have hurt feelings, okay? It really doesn't matter to it. And is it possible that that's a compensation for the fact that it is human nature to want to compete and succeed or fail and know whether you've succeeded or failed? In other words, that's code they wrote to compensate for us, our outcome determination as opposed to input. That's, once again, maybe a good thought or a bad thought, but just occurred to me.
Well, this digital world that we live in is so complex. We know that it's motivating, it's engaging, it can be addictive, which is something we should all watch out for, and it can isolate in certain kinds of ways, but it also has the potential, because as Sir Ken said, it's not going away, folks. We're just going to see more and more of it, but we've got to harness the power of the world in which these kids are living and teach them how to be courageous and teach them how to take risks and teach them to be engaged in ways that will be meaningful and that will bring meaning to their lives and hopefully to the rest of the world.
It also strikes me that it's when we say personalization, for some of our English learners and our special ed kids, technology has been a way that really broke down walls. So where the teacher has skills that they can meet a number of needs, technology has been a bridge, and what we have to help kids do is come back and talk about it.
Absolutely.
Right? Use your verbal skills, share what you know, but not isolate it. I feel like we're expanding the toolbox, but we have to help them not get stuck in one way only, right? So just multiple chances, lots of stimulation, letting them find their strengths, because Gallup tells us that's what you do in life, right? Keep working on those strengths. But technology in the classroom has been amazing, and the adults have been the learners as well, right? So we are still where it is not an option anymore. It is, but we have to keep learning how to connect. Right? We are connectors.
And we have to learn that when children are so immersed, and the technology has been so seductive, and we now know so much more about the things that have been built into the technical tools that we use to invite that addiction, that we've got to teach temperance, we've got to teach discipline, we've got to teach risk-taking, but we've also got to teach the human skills that allow us to continue to connect with one another. And that's going to be critically important. At the start of the new millennium, we were talking about 21st century skills. People don't talk about them anymore, but we need to go back to thinking about collaboration and cooperation and creativity and risk-taking and the kinds of things we need to move ourselves out of the silos in which we currently find ourselves and back into mainstream society where our collection and our collaborative ideas can move us in ways that in isolation we cannot proceed.
Absolutely.
But I'd go back to what you said before. I think technology is the tool. It's
Yes.
not the end. Sir Ken talked about personalization.
Absolutely.
You talked about feeling. Whether you're an A student or an F student, which is an unfortunate way of grading people, to be quite honest with you, you're still going to need trust. You're still going to need love. You're going to still need discipline. You're going to need all those values that will help you in life. You're going to need perseverance. You're going to need communication. You're going to need to learn how to huddle up and, overcome that adversity on the other side of the line. Because, whether it's a healthcare crisis or making payroll in your company or whatever it is, it's not, again, in what I do, it's not about the incredibly elite athlete who's making $30 million. It is about every kid boy or girl who competes, who learns how to interact with each other. Those are the people, by the way, who are defending our freedom and who are the first responders and who are raising our kids for tomorrow. And I think those are important interactions. And again, I commend what you're doing in terms of engagement, and allowing people to fail and saying, hey, because you fail doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you're a competitor. So let's learn from this and learn how to compete better and come back.
And the lesson from the Parkland students is they're engaged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They experienced something that brought them together, gave them voice, allowed them to take risks, and we're learning from them. The courage to take on society and to question, to not be passive. And that's what a center like this can do for students and for teachers. Allow them to be in a synergistic environment in which we learn from one another, we learn to live together, and we learn to take the kind of risks that can move us forward.
And I think in education as well, one of my challenges is kind of assessing, it sounds harsh, but it's actually, I think, important, is that you have to assess as a teacher and an educator, we're very focused, like very small. I'm a musician, I'm teaching a violin player to play violin, but some of my students are not going to go out and become Itzhak Perlman or Yo-Yo Ma. They're going to go out into the community to become, like you say, leaders of the community, the great thinkers, maybe other educators. And how I view my job is not only to teach them to play the violin at the highest level, but to make them like better human beings, so that those are the people of the future and can go out and change the world.
That's right. And we've had, in California, we've just celebrated 100,000 young people have registered to vote. So an election is coming, it starts with I matter, and you matter, and we matter. And if that is reinforced over and over, I think you get to the levels of living. So we say college-ready, career, and life. And it is really about just that relationship. Have you experienced yourself in a positive space? It's so powerful for our children.
And we have to redefine success. There's been a very narrow definition of success. And yet, when I go and look at that new driveway I just had poured at my house, I think the most successful person is the concrete man who brought all of that concrete and made, that pile of rubble in front of my house look wonderful. We've got to redefine pathways for kids to engage and collaborate, and for kids to learn the meaning of a wonderful life.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's establishing, what you got to have is a dynamic of simultaneous competition and cooperation. I mean, all the great stuff comes out of that and breakthroughs. I don't care what you're talking about, Mr. Jobs and Mr. Gates, or even how the NFL functions, or the Beatles for that matter. I mean, John and Paul are, collaborating, cooperating with each other since they were in the air today. They were collaborating, competing at the same time, and the same thing with the Rolling Stones. I mean, they taught Mick Jagger and Keith Richards how to write songs, and those guys turned into their competition. And everybody won out of the entire equation. You know what I mean? And that's you want to have a system. The other thing is we got to get rid of this idea that there's an end state. Because the end state is, it's like, if I get this, I'm done and I've been successful. And it's like, no, you're alive the next day, and then what are you going to do? You know what I mean? I mean, it's you're constantly evolving and changing And failure, well, that's a state I was in now, hit reset, start over again, do it. You know, you just teach that, and success, that's, you know, it's Kipling. I mean, you know, that's an imposter too. Yeah, and you just keep going. There is no end state. And that, I think schools ought to go on forever. You know, you just come back and check in. I come and teach classes mainly because I learn more than the students do. Yeah. And because I've got to get out of, I don't care how brilliant the people I'm talking to all day are. If I'm talking to the same 6 people, think the same 6 things, I'm not getting new ideas out of it. And that's where you get the mixing people around and the collaboration and have people do stuff they're not good at. You know what I mean? You know, because that helps too.
Well, a parent called me and said, hey, what's grit? Because my kids' school, they talk about grit. It's perseverance. Is that what it is? But it's this idea, I mean, you're all talking about, can we teach the love of learning, and the learning is try and get up and fail, and try and get up and fail, and know that that's a process of living, of being, right? So we are absolutely, I think the center is calling for the best being possible, yes. Right? And reinforcing, you get to be, I get to be, and even if there's conflict, that's another way of being, and learn from it and keep growing. And that's fun. That's a lot of fun.
I mean,
that's
we're
getting
all
it right.
on different paths of lifelong learning.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've just got to make sure that as kids come into the systems in which they're going to learn, and into the homes that are going to teach them as well, yep. that we challenge them to be lifelong learners, that we challenge them to understand that you never stop learning, and if we can instill in them a love of learning early, they will carry that through a lifetime of experiences and benefit from programs like the Edge Center. Will you join me in thanking our panel today?
So we promised to be on time, and I want to again, I hope you can appreciate these 5 extraordinary individuals. One more round of applause for this group. As you leave, again, please remember MBA Math Hoops will be out there playing their final round, 16 of 122nd Street Elementary School's finest kids. See how they engage, see how they learn math. Journeys in Film, our wonderful partner Joanne Ash and Journeys in Film, check out their table, doing extraordinary work in contextualizing film, teaching parents, teachers, students how to use film in a teaching and learning way that nobody else was doing. Check out Journeys in Film as you're leaving. And then I would just leave you with one request and one word, immortalized by Jean-Luc Picard: engage. Thank you.